Captain David Chen had been flying charter planes across the South Pacific for nearly 16 years. He'd seen stunning sunrises over endless ocean, navigated through tropical storms, and landed on airstrips that made his passengers grip their seats in terror. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared him for what he was about to see on that ordinary Tuesday morning. The flight had started like any other. David was transporting medical supplies from Fiji to a small research station on one of the outer islands. His co-pilot, a sharp young woman named Rebecca Torres, sat beside him going through the routine checks. The weather forecast had predicted clear skies, but about an hour into the flight, they hit an unexpected band of turbulence. "We should probably adjust our route," Rebecca suggested, pointing at the radar screen. A cluster of storm cells had appeared seemingly out of nowhere, blocking their usual path. David nodded and banked the small aircraft to the left, taking them on a detour that would add maybe 20 minutes to their journey. It was a route he'd only flown a handful of times before, over a scattered chain of tiny, uninhabited islands that barely showed up on most maps. These weren't the postcard-perfect tropical paradises that tourists dreamed about. They were harsh, remote specks of land where nothing lived except seabirds and the occasional sea turtle coming ashore to lay eggs. The sun was bright that morning, reflecting off the water in a way that made everything shimmer like diamonds. David was enjoying the view, thinking about the fish tacos he'd grabbed for lunch when they landed, when Rebecca suddenly grabbed his arm. "David, look down there, 3 o'clock. He followed her gaze and felt his heart skip a beat. On one of the small atolls below, there was something that didn't belong. At first he thought maybe it was just debris from a boat, or perhaps some trash that had washed ashore. But as he looked more carefully, his blood ran cold. It was a person, a small person, and they were waving. Is that a kid?" Rebecca's voice had gone up an octave. David immediately dropped altitude, bringing the plane lower so they could get a better look. He grabbed his binoculars from the side pocket and focused on the beach below. What he saw made his stomach drop. It was a girl, maybe 12 or 13 years old. She was wearing what looked like torn, dirty clothes that might have once been a school uniform. Her skin was badly sunburned, and even from this height David could see how thin she looked. But what really got his attention was what she'd created on the beach. Using dark volcanic rocks and pieces of driftwood, she had spelled out 3 letters in huge symbols that must have taken hours to arrange. SOS. And beside those letters, she'd drawn what looked like an arrow pointing to a makeshift shelter she'd built from palm fronds near the tree line. The girl was jumping now, waving both arms frantically above her head. She must have heard the plane's engine. David could see her mouth was open like she was screaming, though of course he couldn't hear her from up here. "Radio the Coast Guard," David said, his voice tight. "Right now." Rebecca was already reaching for the radio, her hand shaking slightly as she switched to the emergency frequency. "This is Charter Flight 447 calling Fiji Coast Guard. We have an emergency situation. We've spotted what appears to be a stranded miner on an uninhabited atoll, requesting immediate assistance." The response crackled back almost immediately. "Charter 447, please repeat." "Did you say a miner?" "Affirmative. A young girl, approximately 12 to 13 years old. She appears to be alone and in distress. She's created an SOS signal on the beach." David circled the island, keeping the plane low enough to maintain visual contact, but high enough to stay safe. He pulled out his GPS and noted the exact coordinates. The island was barely a quarter-mile across, just a thin strip of sand with maybe a dozen palm trees and some rocky outcroppings. There were no boats visible, no wreckage, no indication of how this girl had gotten there. "Coast Guard, be advised," David continued, taking over the radio from Rebecca. "This island is located at coordinates." He read off the numbers carefully. "It's approximately 230 miles from the nearest inhabited island. There are no vessels in sight, no debris, nothing. Just the girl and her SOS signal." There was a pause on the other end. When the Coast Guard operator came back, David could hear the confusion in his voice. "Charter 447, can you confirm those coordinates? That atoll is marked as uninhabited. We have no reports of any missing persons or boat accidents in that region." "I understand that," David replied, trying to keep the frustration out of his voice. "But I'm telling you, there's a girl down there and she needs help now." Below them, the girl had stopped jumping. She'd collapsed onto her knees in the sand, her head tilted back as she watched the plane circle overhead. Even from this distance, David could sense her desperation. She knew they'd seen her. She was probably praying they wouldn't just fly away. "We're dispatching a helicopter immediately," the Coast Guard operator said. "ETA approximately 90 minutes. Can you maintain your position?" David looked at his fuel gauge. They had enough to circle for maybe another 20 minutes, but they still had to reach the research station and make it back. "Negative. We don't have the fuel capacity, but I can drop lower and do one more pass to get more details." He brought the plane down as low as he safely could, and Rebecca snapped photos with her phone through the window. As they passed over the beach, David could see the girl more clearly now. She was definitely young, just a kid who should have been in school somewhere, not fighting for her life on a deserted island. Her hair was tangled and matted, her face gaunt. But her eyes, even from the plane, he could see the fierce determination in them. She held up both hands, showing 10 fingers, then 8. Was she trying to tell them something? How many days she'd been there? David's chest tightened at the thought of this child spending more than a week alone on this barren rock. "We see you," Rebecca shouted out the window, even though there was no way the girl could hear her. "Help is coming. Just hold on!" As they climbed back to cruising altitude to continue their journey, David couldn't shake the image of that girl from his mind. Who was she? How did she end up there? Where were her parents? The questions tumbled through his head one after another, each one more troubling than the last. "Do you think she'll be okay?" Rebecca asked quietly. David wanted to say yes to offer some reassurance, but the truth was he had no idea. 90 minutes was a long time for someone in her condition. And beyond that, there was a bigger, darker question looming over everything. How does a child end up alone on an uninhabited island 200 miles from anywhere? Something was very, very wrong. And as David guided the plane toward their destination, he couldn't shake the feeling that this girl's story was going to be far more disturbing than any of them could imagine. The Coast Guard helicopter cut through the sky at maximum speed, its rotors slicing through the humid Pacific air. Commander Patricia Wong sat in the front, gripping the overhead handle as they raced toward the coordinates the pilot had reported. She'd been with the Coast Guard for 12 years, and in that time she'd seen plenty of strange things. But this? A young girl alone on an uninhabited island hundreds of miles from civilization? It didn't make sense. Beside her, the co-pilot kept checking the GPS. 20 minutes out, Commander." Patricia nodded and turned to look at the 2 crew members in the back. There was Vincent Reyes, their medic, who was already preparing emergency supplies. And next to him sat Officer Lisa Kimura, a specialist in water rescues who'd volunteered to come along despite being near the end of her shift. "All right, listen up," Patricia said over the headset. "We don't know what we're dealing with here." The pilot said the girl looked malnourished and sunburned. "Vincent, be ready for severe dehydration and possible heat exhaustion. Lisa, scan the waters around the island when we get close. Maybe there's a boat we missed or debris that could tell us what happened." Everyone nodded, their faces serious. They all understood that finding a child in this situation was beyond unusual. It was impossible. And impossible situations usually meant something very bad had happened. As they approached the coordinates, Patricia leaned forward, straining to see through the windscreen. The ocean below was endless blue, broken only by the occasional whitecap. Then finally a small dark speck appeared on the horizon. "There," the co-pilot said, pointing. "That's gotta be it." As they got closer, the island came into focus. It was exactly as the charter pilot had described. Tiny, barren, with just a handful of palm trees and a white sand beach. And there, still visible from the air, was the massive SOS signal made from dark rocks. But where was the girl? Patricia's heart sank. Had they taken too long? Had something happened in the 90 minutes since the plane had spotted her? Then Lisa pointed down. There, under that palm tree. Patricia saw her now. The girl had crawled into the shade of one of the few trees, probably trying to escape the brutal midday sun. As the helicopter descended, she stirred, lifting her head weakly. When she realized what she was seeing, she tried to stand but immediately collapsed back onto the sand. "She's in bad shape," Vincent muttered. "We need to move fast." The moment the helicopter's skids touched the beach, Vincent was out the door, medical kit in hand. Patricia and Lisa followed, close behind. The rotor wash kicked up sand and sent palm fronds flying, but none of them cared. They had one priority, getting to that girl. Up close, she looked even worse than Patricia had feared. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. Her skin was an angry red from sunburn, and her arms and legs were covered in cuts and bruises. Her clothes were in tatters, barely holding together. But what struck Patricia most were her eyes. They were wide with a mixture of relief and terror, like she couldn't quite believe they were real. Vincent knelt beside her immediately. "Hey there, sweetheart. My name's Vincent. We're here to help you. Can you tell me your name?" The girl's mouth moved, but no sound came out at first. Her throat was too dry. Vincent quickly pulled out a water bottle and helped her take small sips. Not too much, not too fast, just enough to wet her mouth. After a few moments, she tried again. This time her voice came out as barely a whisper. "Sophia. My name is Sophia Zhang." Patricia felt her blood run cold. She pulled out her radio and stepped a few feet away. "Base, this is Wong. The girl says her name is Sophia Zhang. I need you to run that name through missing persons databases immediately. All of them. Start with Australia and New Zealand, then expand from there." While Vincent continued his medical assessment, wrapping Sophia in emergency blankets and checking her vital signs, Lisa walked the perimeter of the small beach. She was looking for any clues, anything that might explain how this child had ended up here. "Commander," Lisa called out, "you need to see this." Patricia jogged over to where Lisa was standing near the water's edge. Pulled up on the sand, half hidden behind some rocks, was a small inflatable raft. It was the kind you'd find on a yacht meant for emergencies. The oars were still lying nearby. "She came here in that?" Patricia said, more to herself than to Lisa. "But from where? There's nothing around for hundreds of miles." Lisa was examining the raft more closely. "Look at this, Commander." She pointed to several deep scratches along one side. "These look fresh. And see here? This patch of discoloration? I think this raft was attached to a larger vessel recently. You can see where the rope rubbed against it." Patricia's mind was racing. A raft from a yacht. A young girl alone hundreds of miles from land. This wasn't an accident. This couldn't be an accident. Her radio crackled to life. "Commander Wong, this is Base. We've got a hit on that name. Sophia Zhang, age 13, reported missing from Sydney, Australia 3 weeks ago. She disappeared from a shopping center. The case is still active." Patricia felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. Sydney was more than 2,000 miles away. How does a girl go missing from a shopping mall in one of Australia's biggest cities and end up on a deserted island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean? "Base, contact the Australian Federal Police immediately. Tell them we've found Sophia Zhang alive. And tell them—" She paused, looking at the raft, at the SOS signal, at the makeshift shelter the girl had built to survive. "Tell them this is definitely a criminal case. Someone brought her here." Back at the helicopter, Vincent had Sophia on a stretcher, an IV line already in her arm to help with the dehydration. Patricia knelt down beside her. The girl's eyes were clearer now, more focused but filled with fear. "Sophia," Patricia said gently, "you're safe now. We're going to take you to a hospital where doctors can take care of you. But I need you to know something, okay? You're incredibly brave. Whatever happened to you, however you got here, you survived. You built that shelter. You made that signal, and you stayed alive long enough for us to find you. That takes real courage." A tear rolled down Sophia's sunburned cheek. I thought no one would ever come. I thought I was going to die here." "But you didn't," Patricia said firmly. "You made it. And now we're going to find out who did this to you. Can you tell me anything about how you got here?" Sophia's expression changed. The fear in her eyes deepened, mixed now with something else. Confusion, maybe. Or disbelief, like she was still trying to make sense of what had happened to her. "There was a woman," Sophia whispered, "at the mall. She said my mom sent her. She said there was an emergency." Her voice cracked. "I was so stupid. I should have known. I should have—" "No," Patricia interrupted gently but firmly. "You are not stupid. You're a child and someone lied to you. Someone tricked you. That's not your fault. None of this is your fault." Vincent checked his watch. "Commander, we need to go. She needs a hospital." Patricia nodded and stood up. As the crew loaded Sophia into the helicopter, she took one last look at the island. The SOS signal, the raft, the small shelter made from palm fronds. This girl had been left here to die. Someone had kidnapped her, brought her across hundreds of miles of ocean, and then abandoned her on this rock. The only question was why, and more importantly, who else might be out there on other boats heading toward other islands? Was Sophia the only victim, or was she one of many? As the helicopter lifted off and turned toward Fiji, Patricia made a silent promise. They would find whoever did this. They would track down every person involved in bringing this child to that island, and they would make sure it never happened to anyone else. Below them, the tiny atoll grew smaller and smaller, until it was just another speck in the vast blue ocean. But Patricia knew she would never forget it. None of them would, because that little island had nearly been Sophia Jung's grave. Instead, by some miracle, it had become the place where her nightmare finally ended. The hospital room in Suva was quiet except for the steady beep of the heart monitor. Sophia had been there for 2 days now, hooked up to IVs and covered in bandages and cooling gel for her sunburns. The doctor said she was lucky to be alive. A few more days on that island and her body would have simply given up. Detective Raymond Cross sat in the corner of the room waiting. He'd flown in from Sydney the moment he got the call. For 3 weeks he'd been working Sophia's case, following dead ends and watching her parents fall apart with grief, and now against all odds she was alive. But the relief he felt was mixed with a cold anger. Someone had done this to her. Someone had stolen her, transported her across thousands of miles of ocean and left her to die. And he was going to find out who. Sophia's parents had arrived that morning and the reunion had been overwhelming. Her mother couldn't stop crying, couldn't stop touching her daughter's face like she needed to prove she was real. Her father had just held her hand, unable to speak, tears streaming down his face. Raymond had given them time alone, but now he needed answers. Time was critical in cases like these. A nurse poked her head in. "Detective? She's awake and says she's ready to talk to you." Raymond stood and walked to the bedside. Sophia looked so small in the hospital bed, so young. Her parents sat on either side of her, holding her hands. Her mother, Helen, looked at him with red, swollen eyes. "Please be gentle with her," Helen whispered. "I will," Raymond promised. He pulled up a chair and gave Sophia what he hoped was a reassuring smile. "Hi, Sophia. I'm Detective Cross. I've been looking for you since the day you disappeared. I'm so glad you're safe now. But I need your help to catch the people who did this to you. Can you tell me everything you remember?" Sophia nodded slowly. Her voice was still hoarse, but stronger than it had been on the island. "I remember everything. I don't think I'll ever forget it." She started from the beginning. She'd been at Westfield Shopping Center with her older brother Kevin. He was supposed to be watching her while their parents were at work, but he'd gotten distracted by a video game store. Sophia had wandered to look at books in a nearby shop when a woman approached her. She looked normal, Sophia said, her voice shaking slightly. She was wearing nice clothes, had a friendly smile. She said her name was Christina, and that she was a friend of my mom's from work. She said there'd been an accident and that my dad was in the hospital. She said Mom sent her to get me right away. Helen gasped and gripped her daughter's hand tighter. Raymond made notes, his jaw clenched. It was a classic tactic, preying on a child's fear and trust. "I was scared," Sophia continued. "I tried to call Kevin, but Christina said there was no time. She said we had to go immediately. She seemed so worried, so genuine. I believed her." Tears started rolling down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I should have known better." "No, baby," Helen said firmly. "You did nothing wrong, nothing." Raymond leaned forward. "Sophia, you did exactly what most people would do in that situation. This woman was a professional. She knew how to trick people." "What happened next?" Sophia took a shaky breath. She led me to the parking garage. There was a white van waiting and a man was inside. I started to feel like something was wrong, but before I could run, the man grabbed me. He put something over my mouth, like a cloth with some kind of chemical on it. Everything went black. Raymond's pen moved quickly across his notepad. "Can you describe the man?" He was big, maybe 40 years old, with dark hair and a beard.
"He had an accent, but I don't know what kind."
And he had a tattoo on his wrist. It looked like some kind of symbol or letter, but I only saw it for a second. "That's good, Sophia. That's really helpful. What's the next thing you remember?" Waking up in a dark room. It was moving, rocking back and forth. I realized I was on a boat. A big one. I could hear the engine, feel the waves. I was locked in a small cabin with no windows. There was a thin mattress on the floor and a bucket in the corner. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. I was so scared. I screamed for help, but no one came. She described being kept in that cabin for what she guessed was about a week, maybe longer. Time became impossible to track in the darkness. Twice a day, someone would open the door and slide in a tray with food and water. She never saw their face. They were always backlit by the bright light from outside. I could hear voices sometimes, Sophia said. People talking on the deck above me. They spoke in English sometimes, but also other languages I didn't understand. Once I heard a girl crying in another room. I tried calling out to her, but someone yelled at me to be quiet. Raymond's blood ran cold. Another girl. There had been other victims on that boat. Then one night everything changed. I heard shouting, lots of it. People running on the deck. The boat stopped moving. I could hear men arguing, and one of them sounded really angry, really panicked. I heard the word police a few times. That's when I started to hope that maybe someone was coming to save me. But that's not what happened. Instead, around what Sophia guessed was midnight, the cabin door burst open. The bearded man from the van grabbed her roughly and dragged her up to the deck. For the first time in days, she saw the sky, the stars, the endless dark ocean around them. There were 3 other men on the boat, Sophia said. They were all arguing in different languages. One of them kept pointing at something in the distance. I looked and saw lights far away. Maybe another ship. The men made a quick decision. They couldn't risk being caught with kidnapped children on board. They pulled out a small inflatable raft, the kind meant for emergencies. They threw in some bottles of water and a bag with some food. Then they put Sophia in it. I begged them not to, Sophia said, fresh tears streaming down her face. I promised I wouldn't tell anyone anything. I promised I'd be quiet, but they didn't care. The bearded man pushed the raft away from the boat with his foot. He said something I didn't understand, and then they turned on the engine and left. Just like that, they were gone. I was alone in the middle of the ocean in the dark. The room was silent except for Sophia's quiet crying. Helen was sobbing now, holding her daughter close. Even Raymond had to take a moment to compose himself. "How did you find the island?" he asked gently. I didn't know what to do. I thought about trying to paddle toward those lights I'd seen, but they were too far away. Then just as the sun was coming up, I saw it. This tiny island. It didn't look like much, but it was land. I used the oars they'd left in the raft and paddled as hard as I could. My arms were burning, and it took hours, but I made it. She described her 4 days on the island, how she'd used her school lessons to remember that SOS was the international distress signal, how she'd collected rainwater from leaves to supplement the few bottles she had, how she'd built a shelter from palm fronds to escape the sun, how she'd rationed the small amount of food they'd left, eating only tiny portions to make it last. I kept telling myself someone would come, Sophia said. I remembered hearing once that planes fly over the Pacific Ocean all the time. I just had to make my signal big enough and wait, and I was right. That pilot saw me. He saved my life. Raymond closed his notebook. Sophia, you saved your own life. Your intelligence, your courage, your refusal to give up, that's what kept you alive. He looked at her seriously. Now I need to use what you've told me to find these people. They can't be allowed to do this to anyone else. Can you work with a sketch artist to help us create drawings of the people you saw? Sophia nodded, wiping her eyes. I want to help. I need to help. Because that other girl I heard crying on the boat, she's still out there somewhere. And maybe there are others. Someone has to stop them. Raymond stood and put a hand on her shoulder. We will stop them. I promise you that. You've given us more information than we had before. Every detail you've remembered brings us one step closer to finding them. As he left the hospital room, Raymond was already on his phone, calling his team back in Australia. They had descriptions now, details about the boat, the timeline, the possible route, and most importantly, they knew this wasn't just about one girl. This was bigger, darker, and more urgent than anyone had realized. Detective Raymond Cross sat in a conference room surrounded by maps, satellite images, and computer screens. It had been 5 days since he'd interviewed Sophia in the hospital, and in that time his investigation had exploded into something much bigger than a single kidnapping case. He was now working with a task force that included officers from 3 countries, Interpol agents, and specialists from the FBI's Human Trafficking Division. The sketch artist had done excellent work with Sophia's descriptions. The drawing of the bearded man with the tattoo was now circulating through every law enforcement database in the Asia-Pacific region. And just yesterday, they'd gotten their first break. Agent Christine Okoye from Interpol stood at the front of the room, pulling up images on the large screen. We got a hit on the facial recognition, she said, pointing to a photo of the bearded man from Sophia's description. His name is Viktor Petrov, Russian national, age 42. He has a criminal record going back 20 years. Smuggling, assault, and he was questioned in connection with a human trafficking case in Thailand in 2019. But they couldn't make the charges stick. Raymond leaned forward. Where is he now? That's where it gets interesting, Christine continued. She pulled up another image, this one showing a luxury yacht docked at a marina. We've been analyzing shipping routes and satellite data from the time frame when Sophia was on that boat. We cross-referenced it with known vessels associated with Petrov. 3 days before Sophia was found, this yacht filed a distress call claiming engine trouble. The call came from approximately 40 nautical miles from where she was abandoned. Let me guess, Raymond said. They canceled the distress call shortly after? Exactly. Said they'd fixed the problem and didn't need assistance. But here's the thing. The yacht is called Ocean Star, registered in Panama, owned by a shell company. And when we dug deeper into that company, we found connections to a trafficking network that's been on our radar for 2 years. Another agent, a quiet man named Henry Park who specialized in maritime law, spoke up. We pulled the yacht's transponder data. It shows a pattern of movement that's consistent with human trafficking routes. It travels between Southeast Asia, the Pacific Islands, and occasionally South America. It stays just outside territorial waters, moves at night, and turns off its transponder for hours at a time. Raymond felt his pulse quicken. Where is the yacht now? Henry pulled up a real-time tracking map. That's the good news. We've been monitoring it since we made the connection. Right now it's anchored near the Philippines in international waters. We've had eyes on it for 48 hours. Have they tried to move? Raymond asked. Not yet. We think they're waiting for something. Maybe a rendezvous with another vessel, maybe new instructions. But we've also noticed something else. Henry zoomed in on the tracking data. 2 other yachts have been following similar patterns. Different names, different registration, but owned by related shell companies. We think this is a coordinated operation involving multiple vessels. Christine took over again. We've been working with Coast Guard authorities in the Philippines, Indonesia, and Australia. We're planning coordinated raids on all 3 vessels. But we need to move carefully. If they get spooked and realize we're onto them, they could destroy evidence or worse, harm any victims they might have on board. The weight of those words settled over the room. Sophia had mentioned hearing another girl crying. If there were children on those boats right now, every minute counted. Raymond stood and walked to the map. What about the woman who took Sophia from the mall? The one who called herself Christina? Christine nodded. We've made progress there too. We pulled security footage from Westfield and the surrounding area. We tracked her movements after she left with Sophia. She got into a vehicle with diplomatic plates, which initially made things complicated. But we kept digging. She pulled up a photo of a woman in her mid-30s with dark hair and a professional appearance. This is Natasha Volkov. She works as a translator at the Russian consulate in Sydney. Wait, Raymond said, his mind racing. She has diplomatic immunity? She did, Christine said with a slight smile. Until yesterday. The Russian government, after being presented with our evidence, agreed to waive her immunity. She's been working as a recruiter for this trafficking ring while hiding behind her diplomatic position. She was arrested this morning at her apartment in Sydney. She's in custody now. Raymond felt a surge of satisfaction. Has she talked? Not yet. She lawyered up immediately. But we found a burner phone in her apartment with messages that link her directly to the operation. We're working on decrypting the full contents, but what we've seen so far is damning. She was communicating with someone on the Ocean Star, getting instructions on which targets to pursue. Henry pulled up another document. We also recovered the inflatable raft from the island where Sophia was found. Forensics found fingerprints matching Petrov, and they found something else. Traces of a specialized marine paint that's only used on high-end yachts. We got a sample from the Ocean Star during a previous routine inspection in Thailand last year. It's a match, the pieces were coming together. Raymond could feel it. But there was something that still bothered him. Why did they abandon Sophia? Why not just... He couldn't bring himself to finish the sentence. Christine's expression was grim. We think they panicked. Remember that distress call they made and then canceled? We believe they spotted a naval vessel in the area and thought they were about to be boarded. They needed to get rid of any evidence fast. Abandoning her on an island was their solution. They probably assumed she wouldn't survive long enough to be found. They didn't count on her being smart enough to signal for help, Raymond said quietly. Or brave enough to stay alive. Exactly, Christine agreed. And they definitely didn't count on a pilot taking an unusual route because of weather and spotting her. If Captain Chen had flown his normal path that day, Sophia would still be on that island. The room was quiet for a moment. everyone processing the terrible chain of events and the miraculous coincidence that had saved Sophia's life. Agent Okoye broke the silence. "We're moving on the raids tomorrow at dawn. All 3 vessels simultaneously. We'll have helicopter support, Coast Guard cutters, and tactical teams. The Philippines, Indonesia, and Australian authorities are all coordinating. This is going to be the biggest operation against maritime human trafficking in this region in over a decade." Raymond nodded. "I want to be there." "On the Ocean Star raid." Christine looked at him seriously. "Raymond, you're not trained for tactical operations. These are dangerous criminals." "I know," he said firmly, "but I made a promise to Sophia. I told her we'd catch the people who did this to her. I need to see this through." After a moment, Christine nodded. "All right, but you stay back with command. You don't go on the boat until it's secured." "Understood?" "Understood." As the meeting broke up and teams began preparing for the next day's operations, Raymond stepped outside to get some air. He pulled out his phone and saw a text message from Sophia's mother, Helen. It was a photo of Sophia, back home in Sydney now, smiling weakly but genuinely. She was sitting in her own bed, surrounded by her family. The message read, "She's asking about you. Wants to know if you've found them yet." Raymond typed back, "Tell her we're close. Very close. And tell her she's the bravest person I've ever met." He looked out at the harbor, where somewhere beyond the horizon 3 yachts sat in the water, unaware that their time was running out. Tomorrow they would strike. Tomorrow they would shut down this operation. And if there were other children on those boats, other victims waiting for rescue, tomorrow they would bring them home. Raymond thought about David Chen, the pilot who had made that weather detour, about Commander Patricia Wong and her crew who had raced to the island, about Sophia, who had refused to give up even when she was alone and terrified. All these people, connected by chance and choice, had come together to expose this network of evil. Tomorrow would be about justice. But more than that, it would be about making sure no other child would ever be abandoned on a deserted island again. No other family would have to endure 3 weeks of not knowing if their daughter was alive or dead. As the sun set over the water, Raymond made one more silent promise. Not just to Sophia, but to every victim of this trafficking ring. This ends now. Tomorrow, we end this. The sky was still dark when the 3 Coast Guard vessels moved into position. Raymond stood on the bridge of the lead ship, his heart pounding as they approached the coordinates where the Ocean Star was anchored. Around them, invisible in the pre-dawn darkness, 2 other teams were closing in on the other suspect yachts near Indonesia and Australia. Everything had to happen at exactly the same time. If one crew got warning, they could alert the others. Commander Patricia Wong stood beside him, coordinating with the tactical team. She'd volunteered to lead this operation after hearing it was connected to Sophia's case. "All units in position," she said into her radio. "We strike in 3 minutes." Raymond could see the outline of the Ocean Star now, a sleek white yacht that looked like it belonged to a wealthy businessman, not criminals. Its lights were off and there was no movement on deck. With any luck, most of the crew was still asleep. 2 minutes, Patricia announced. The tactical team checked their gear one last time. These were specially trained officers who'd done dozens of raids on vessels suspected of criminal activity. But everyone knew this one was different. There might be children on that boat. Victims who'd been waiting for rescue just like Sophia had waited on that island. 1 minute. Raymond held his breath. Somewhere in Sydney, Sophia was probably asleep in her own bed, safe with her family. She'd been home for a week now, starting the long process of healing. But she'd made him promise to call her the moment they caught the people responsible. He intended to keep that promise. Go, go, go! The Coast Guard vessel surged forward, closing the distance to the yacht in seconds. Floodlights blazed to life, illuminating the Ocean Star in harsh white light. A loudspeaker boomed across the water in multiple languages. "This is the Philippine Coast Guard. You are ordered to remain where you are. This vessel is being boarded." For a moment, nothing happened. Then chaos erupted. Figures appeared on the yacht's deck, running in different directions. Someone tried to start the engine, but the Coast Guard had already deployed a device that jammed the yacht's controls. They weren't going anywhere. The tactical team moved with practiced precision, throwing boarding ladders onto the yacht and climbing up in seconds. Raymond watched from the command vessel as officers swarmed the deck, shouting orders, securing suspects. He could hear yelling in different languages, the sound of doors being kicked open. Patricia's radio crackled with constant updates. Main deck secured. 6 suspects in custody. Moving below deck now. Second deck clear. Found living quarters. Evidence of recent occupation. We've got the engine room. 2 more suspects secured. Then a different voice came through, tight with emotion. Command, this is Team 3. We found them. We've found the victims. We need medical up here now. Raymond felt his knees go weak. Patricia immediately radioed the medical team. Get on that boat, now. It felt like hours, but it was probably only 10 minutes before more reports came through. We have 4 victims. All children, ages approximately 10 to 15. They're alive but in poor condition, requesting immediate medical evacuation. Patricia looked at Raymond and he could see tears in her eyes. We got them. We actually got them. The radio crackled again with updates from the other 2 operations. Indonesian team reporting. Vessel secured, 3 victims recovered, 7 suspects in custody. Australian team reporting vessel secured, 2 victims recovered, 5 suspects in custody. 9 children, 9 kids who would be going home to their families. 9 lives saved because one pilot had taken a weather detour and spotted a girl making an SOS signal on a beach. As the sun began to rise, Raymond was finally allowed to board the Ocean Star. The scene was organized chaos as medical personnel treated the rescued children and investigators photographed evidence. He walked through the yacht, seeing the locked cabin where victims had been held, finding documents and electronics that would provide crucial evidence. And then he saw him. Viktor Petrov, the bearded man from Sofia's description, sitting in handcuffs on the deck. Their eyes met and Raymond walked over to him. Do you know who I am? Raymond asked quietly. Petrov said nothing, just stared at him with cold, dead eyes. I'm the detective who's been looking for a girl named Sofia Zhang. The girl you kidnapped from Sydney. The girl you kept locked in a dark cabin for a week. The girl you abandoned on a deserted island to die. Something flickered in Petrov's expression. Surprise, maybe. He hadn't expected her to survive. She lived, Raymond said, his voice hard. She built a shelter, rationed her food, created an SOS signal, and she lived. And because she lived, because she was brave enough and strong enough to tell us everything. We found you. Every single person involved in this operation is being arrested right now. It's over. Petrov looked away, but Raymond wasn't finished. Those children you had locked up down there, they're going home to their families. The evidence on this boat is going to put you and everyone you work with in prison for the rest of your lives. And it's all because one 13-year-old girl refused to give up. Raymond turned and walked away, leaving Petrov to contemplate his fate. 3 months later, Raymond sat in a community center in Sydney, watching as Sofia stood at a podium addressing a room full of police officers, teachers, and parents. She was talking about safety awareness, about the tactics predators use, about trusting your instincts. Her voice was steady and clear. The traumatized girl from the hospital was still in there somewhere, still healing, but she was also something else now. She was a survivor who'd turned her nightmare into a mission to protect others. I want every kid to know, Sofia was saying, that if something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't worry about being polite. Don't worry about hurting someone's feelings. If an adult you don't know tries to get you to go somewhere with them, even if they seem nice, even if they say they know your parents, don't go, scream, run, find help. After her speech, there was a long round of applause. Raymond stood and clapped along with everyone else, feeling an overwhelming sense of pride. This girl had been through hell and somehow come out the other side determined to make sure it didn't happen to anyone else. Later, at a small reception, Sofia found Raymond talking with her parents. Detective Cross, she said, smiling. Did you hear the news? What news? Captain Chen, the pilot who found me, he started a foundation. They're going to do regular flyovers of remote islands in the Pacific, looking for people who might be stranded or in trouble. They're calling it the Guardian Angel Project. Raymond felt a lump in his throat. That's amazing. And Commander Wong got a promotion. She's going to be heading up a new task force specifically focused on maritime human trafficking. Sophia's smile faded slightly. They told me that because of my case, they've already rescued 6 more victims from other operations. 6 kids who might have ended up like me but didn't because people were paying attention now. That's because of you, Sophia, Raymond said. Your courage, your testimony, everything you did made this possible. She shook her head. It's because of a lot of people. Captain Chen, who spotted me. Commander Wang, who rescued me. You, who believed me and caught them. My parents, who never stopped looking for me. Even those doctors at the hospital who helped me heal. We all did this together. She was right, of course. It had taken dozens of people working across multiple countries, all doing their part. But it had started with one girl's refusal to give up, even when she was alone on a deserted island with no reason to hope. The trials took almost a year, but in the end, justice was served. Petrov and his crew received life sentences. Natasha Volkov, the recruiter who'd posed as Christina, got 25 years. The entire trafficking network was dismantled, with arrests made in 7 countries. But more importantly, all 9 children rescued from those yachts were reunited with their families. Counseling programs were established to help them heal, and new protocols were put in place to better track vessels suspected of criminal activity in international waters. Raymond stayed in touch with Sophia and her family over the years. He watched as she grew up, graduated high school, and eventually went to university to study criminal justice. She told him she wanted to work in law enforcement someday, to help other victims the way she'd been helped. And sometimes on quiet nights, Raymond would think about that tiny island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, a place that should have been a grave but instead became a symbol of hope. A place where a young girl proved that the human spirit, when pushed to its absolute limit, is capable of extraordinary things. The case had taught him something important, that evil exists in this world, but so does courage. So does compassion. So does the kind of random luck that puts a pilot on an unusual route at exactly the right moment to see an SOS signal on a beach. Sophia Zhang had been given up for dead, abandoned on a rock in the middle of nowhere. But she survived. She fought, she won, and in doing so, she saved not just herself, but countless others who would never have to face the same nightmare because the people responsible were finally behind bars. That, Raymond thought, was the real miracle of this story. Not just that Sophia was found, but that her courage had created ripples that spread far beyond that one island, touching lives and changing systems in ways that would protect children for years to come. Sometimes one person really can make a difference. And sometimes that person is a 13-year-old girl who refused to let a deserted island be the end of her story.